I think we're ready to go. Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to see you for the fourth webinar, and I've been in touch with a lot of you, and please keep in touch. I think that it's really important that all of us who are committed to this shared mission share best practices and resources, because, you know, whenever I sync up with somebody who does similar work, I feel like we're both doing the same work, and it's like, gosh, we're really like replicating our time here, and if we could just kind of share and connect more, it would allow us to make a lot of new different things for the field. So hopefully we all keep in touch and we share, strategic plans and goals and resources that we make for our colleagues, and that will allow us to really move the field forward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen really quick. Let's see, make sure this is going to cooperate. And let's see, you should see, well, you don't want to see that last slide yet. That's jumping the gun here. But again, what we're going to talk about in this webinar is really bringing everything together. So, we started off talking about like how UDL fits as a foundation of inclusive practice within this multi-tiered network. We talked big picture about the how to create these lessons, focusing on goals and methods and materials and assessments, moving towards self-differentiation for all students, whereas the lens in the past has always been like teacher differentiation. But as we started talking about last week, that is going to be clouded by my own implicit bias. There's really no way around that. And so what we want to make sure that we're doing is we want to make sure that, oops, sorry about that. We want to make sure that all of our practices are truly culturally responsive. And so how do we do that, right? And how does that connect with UDL? So the first four things we went over in the last webinar, where we talk about we want to have a really, really asset-based view of all students and their families. We want to make sure that we're communicating really high expectations for all students and what they're capable of. We want to make sure that that learning is embedded in what's meaningful and valuable to students. And then we want to make sure that it is really student-centered, that we're balancing everything that students bring to the table with everything that we have that is alterable within our means to make it personalized for students. So I just want to stop real quick for that review just to see if anyone has any questions. Let me get out of this screen here. So just to kind of go back and highlight what we did during the last webinar was really focusing on, like, do we really have the highest expectations for all students? Do we truly, truly believe that they're doing the best they can with what they have? And when they're not doing well, there's some sort of barrier that they're facing that we have to figure out how to eliminate. And that job becomes less about pushing content and more about actually deconstructing barriers, which is a totally different lens of teaching and learning. So, just to kind of activate background knowledge, does anyone have any questions to start off this webinar as we connect to the last webinar and thinking about just that concept of culturally responsive, culturally sustaining instruction and how that requires a framework that allows us to personalize education for all students? So, there's something in the chat. I'm going to peek. Oh, it just says, welcome, we're here at the final webinar. So welcome, everyone. Want to make sure there's no questions before I move on here. Okay. So as we're thinking about like moving into this thing, one of the things that I find is so incredibly underutilized in education is this concept of essential questions. And so when we talk about what a culturally mediated instruction is, I want to start diving deeply into this concept of like, what are we really trying to do? And so what's really interesting is people think of culturally responsive teaching and universal design for learning as two completely different frameworks. And the reality is that like the definition of culturally mediated instruction is when you use diverse ways of knowing, diverse ways of understanding, and diverse ways of representing information. And essentially this is universal design for learning. And, so when you're thinking about what allows us to culturally mediate instruction, the answer is UDL allows us to do that. And so what we try to do is we try to make sure that we're asking a lot of questions and providing a lot of opportunities for students to really share what they know and how they came to know that. And that's something that we miss sometimes. Like we really focus on what kids know, but like how did they learn it? So you might have a student that's like, I know a lot about cars, but when you say, how do you know a lot about cars? cars. And he's like, oh, my grandfather's a mechanic. I spend all this time with my grandfather, you know, and I watch him. Like from that, I understand through the funds of knowledge, like this kid is going to learn in interpersonal situations that they learn by doing, you know, that they have really close relationships with people, and that's required to learn. And when I know that about students, I can support them more in helping them to understand how they're going to set goals for their own learning, how they're going to comprehend the information, like what are their different ways of knowing and understanding, and how they're going to express what they know. What are their different ways of representing information? And the reality is the curriculum that we adopt is not designed for that. So if you look, you know, on the left-hand side, these are like classic blurbs that you're going to get from a curriculum that you adopt. Let's just look at that middle one there that says, like, think about what it would take to create a country. What kind of laws would be needed? Who would write them? Write your ideas in a paragraph. Share your paragraph. Discuss how your ideas are alike and different. There are so many barriers inherent in that one little blurb. It's ridiculous because there's a number of different questions. It assumes you have a background of what laws are. It assumes you can write a paragraph. It assumes you have the skills for collaboration. And then you also have to throw in this compare and contrast on top of it. And we often see these things. And when we step back and we said, well, what really are the barriers to that? You know, it makes so much more sense to say, you know, it's really about understanding how governments are formed. And then what are your goals? What do you want to know about laws and how they're made? And, you know, what's the best way for you to learn that? And then what's the best way for you to share what you know? You know, is it collaborating in person through a conversation? Is it more, you know, going online and maybe working in like a Google Doc? Is it creating a blog? So what I want to do is I want to just take, you know, a minute. I'm going to stop this share here and I want to take a minute and I want you to think about what is your best case scenario for collaboration in real life. So I'm going to stop the share, and if you could go into the chat and just kind of put like what allows you to collaborate really well. Like, do you like to collaborate with people you know, diverse partners, people you don't know? Do you prefer to collaborate online? So, you know, take a minute and put in that chat box, and we're just going to kind of see the variability of what makes for meaningful collaboration for you. I'm going to type my answer as well. Okay, so we have Emily and Susan. So this is so awesome. This is what I love. So like one of the things I wrote is like big, loud collaborative groups. And then Bill's like, I like working with one or two others, right? You know, Kevin is talking about like we're all sharing a common goal, where some people are talking about, you know, non-judgmental, you know, a space for failure. So all of these different things, when we say to students, like, what do you need to be successful in collaboration? Like, what prevents you from having meaningful collaboration? You start to see, oh, this is awesome. Seema wrote like visual mapping of ideas, whereas that wouldn't be something, I mean, it would be fine for me, but it wouldn't be like something that I would say is meaningful for me in collaboration. Like it would be, it's totally cool, but I'm not a mapper, right? But when you look back at the example that I showed you, it's so one size fits all, and there's so many barriers inherent in that. And we fire those things off all the time. Like we look at students and we're like, okay, so this is what it says, turn to this part of the textbook, and then just, you know, write the paragraph, have the conversation. And it's like, you don't realize all like the meta skills that are necessary to make that happen. So to go back to this presentation, where are we here? Okay, so now what I want to dive into is this concept of, so if we know that instruction is culturally mediated when students have an opportunity to think about like what we just did, self-reflection, right? We talked about that in the first and second webinar. You're going to reflect, then you're going to choose then you're going to do, right? So we're asking, I just asked you to like reflect. And if I did that in my class, let's say you were in the graduate class, I would basically say, now I want you to think about your perfect picture of collaboration. And let's all talk about like how we can make diverse groups here that work. So those of you who want to, be loud and go to the side, you can do that. For those of you who are more interested in working in collaboration, we'll set up a Google Doc. If you want to do 1 or 2 people, you can leave and go to a coffee shop. But like, even though we don't think about that as being cultural, that's the definition of culture, because what we're doing is we're meeting and we're valuing all people and where they are. So now getting to this essential question piece is, so often teachers are like absolutely, they feel as though that they have to be really loyal to a curriculum. And I just want to share that you can have a curriculum and you can universally design that in like amazing ways. And one of the really interesting things is, a lot of the times when we have barriers in, how we're going to teach and how we expect kids to express what they know, what we're really running into is like our own implicit bias and or what the textbook is telling us to do. But when we step back and ask ourselves, what really is it that students should know and be able to do as a result of that, we really get to the core of the standards and then the essential question. So some people misinterpret UBD, or understanding by design, as being the same thing as UDL. They're certainly comparable. So like I would use kind of a UBD framework to universally design lessons, because I want to start with the why. Like, what is the purpose? What are my standards? What am I really asking? How am I going to know if kids can do it? And then how am I going to provide opportunities for them to learn it? Now, they're not synonymous, because certainly it doesn't automatically, just because you are using the understanding by design framework, it doesn't mean it's going to be universally designed, because you might say, this is the essential question. All kids are going to take a test, so I know they can answer it, so on and so forth. But I just want you to think about this for a minute and how like culture and UDL come together. These are just, I took them from a Journeys curriculum, which is like a pretty popular curriculum in California, I know, for literacy. And we start with this 3rd grade unit that says, how do inventions help athletes, right? I mean, that's a great question, okay? So imagine we're in a classroom. What usually happens is you open up a curriculum, you look at the essential question, and you're like, okay, whatever. Maybe you ask kids to think about it for 30 seconds. But I would use that as a means for students to self-reflect, to honor their culture, and then to cut, thinking about what they know about it already. So what I would do is I would say, okay, I'm going to put on a timer for 10 minutes. I'm going to put out a bunch of butcher paper, right? And I want you to think of everything you know about the word invention and the word athlete. So, when you're thinking of inventions, what comes to mind? And you can write words, you can draw pictures, you can sketch the answers. I always had huge crates of magazines in my classroom. And I would always say, like, you can rip things out, like if the image makes sense to you. And so like kids can work alone, they can work together. And so you even think about, like, let's say you have English language learners who don't quite know those words yet, but they start seeing people draw basketballs and tennis balls and, baseball bats. And then they're going to go, oh, okay, like we're talking about athletes. But baseball and basketball are very like dominant American culture sports. And there's so many other amazing sports around the world, like hunting and fishing and, skiing and sumo wrestling. And, you start thinking about, like, when you think about what it means to be athletic, it's dancers, it's cheerleaders, it's long distance runners. It could be, men who work, with really, really heavy machinery, and that's really athletic to be like moving around and being a mechanic. And then you think about inventions, you could go old school, like the light bulb. So what you're trying to get at is like, look at everything we already know. And then I would say, okay, so we just spent 10 minutes. We know all this stuff about inventions. We know all this stuff about athletes. Let's start making like connections, like which inventions may help which athletes. And then now that we've done that, go through like a KWL chart. What do you already know about inventions and athletes? What do you want to know? Like you might be like, oh, I've never even thought of like dance being an athletic event, and then you'd be like, of course it is. Like, of course it is. And then you start thinking about, okay, so this unit that we're about to get into is going to help us learn more about the sports and the athletics that we care about. And you could make really great arguments that being a competitive video player, I mean, they're very highly paid competitors. And so you could make an argument that that is an athletic event, you know, playing video games online. And so that is how I would start a unit. Now, the reality is it's following that essential question. There are 3 articles. 2 are about basketball. 1 is about track and field. So very dominant culture. And not all your kids are going to care at all about those things, right? But we're going to say, we're going to closely read 3 articles, but every time we read those 3 articles, you're going to be really choosing what you want to build. So we're going to read 1 article and we're going to talk about problem solution. And then what you're going to do is you're going to then go and find your own article about whatever athlete you care about and find a problem solution. Like, what are the barriers that prevent those athletes from being really great? So if you take a video game player, for example, the invention of the wireless controller, or like the headset with the microphone, that was like a very big advance when you're thinking about technology and how it helped competitors, right? And we miss so much of that. And then we say, gosh, like, you know, their kids aren't engaged, kids aren't. And when you say, okay, how do inventions help athletes? You give them like a very generic, you know, okay, now you're going to turn to a partner, you're going to talk about why basketball is important. You've lost so many kids already. And when you start to say, of course you can research about skateboard, like, absolutely, skateboarding's awesome. Or, you know, of course you could talk about, you know, parkour, which is like more like street athletics. Those are all athletes, and we can't put our own bias on like what we consider to be an athlete. So I'm going to stop the share again, and just to see if anyone has anything to say. Okay, so cricket. So what are your thoughts just on the power of essential questions? Because most people will say, I don't even know where I can provide choice. Like, I don't know where to start. And what it comes down to is, well, what are you trying to get students to understand? What do they need to know? What do they need to be able to do? And what is your essential question? And that is where there's so much power for personalization. So I'm going to give you a minute to either unmute yourself and ask a question, or to just write something right in there. But just thinking about what potential there is in essential questions in leading a universally designed lesson. So let's see what you got. So Seema had talked about like the real message is, before you teach anything, before you pick out a novel, before you hand out the worksheets, before you set up materials, you have to know at the end of this what it is that every student will know and be able to do. That has to be the first thing. What else do we have here? Let's keep it cooking. I mean, I taught middle school for 12 years, so my wait time can be pretty good on this. Yes, the purpose and the goals. So again, you know, so often when kids say, why are we doing this? They have every right to ask that question, because, like, you know, they're required to sit in school. And it's like, well, this is why you're going to do it. And this is how you're going to work towards it in a way that's meaningful to you. And I can still be faithful to that curriculum, which a lot of people like don't see. And so, you know, as we think about the shift, what I want you to think about here is, I'm going to move to this next one, is like what we really want to focus on here is this concept of teacher as facilitator. And I'll make sure that you have all of these webinars in hard copy. So if you want to like make a copy of them or make notes, but I just wrote an article for eSchool News called So You Think You Know About UDL. And so many teachers, when they first start learning about UDL, they think of it as like, I must control which options and choices kids have. And that's a lot of power, but that's not honoring students. And so we want to shift from power to honor. So if I'm like, I decide what students are allowed to do, I decide what students are allowed to see, you know, eventually what ends up happening is I end up at a place where I'm not honoring them as individual learners. I'm not valuing them as expert learners. My expectations for them isn't high enough because I'm trying to control it too much. But when you step back through the UDL lens, what you'll notice is the very first thing that you have to think about when you're being a facilitator, which is a culturally responsive and universally designed leader, is you always want to go back to that learning goal. You always want to think about what it is that students have to know or be able to do. And then to break it down, what are all the skills they need to be able to know or do that? And because we want to be facilitators, we have to create a classroom that is goal-oriented. And we often say heightening the salience of goals and objectives, but what that's really doing is it's trying to make all students go through this process of choose, do, review with a destination in mind. And when we do that, and we also provide options and a buffet for how students are going to learn best, and we model like, okay, this is what I'm going to choose and why, but I love that you're going to do something differently. What we do is we create a community with our students. Again, we're moving from power to honor. Now, if you look at the student's role in that scenario, is they have to become expert learners, okay? Because they have to be able to say, I understand this is what I need to know and be able to do. I understand this is what I already know. This is what I still need to know to get there. They're thinking about their own strengths and weaknesses, and what they're doing is they're starting to monitor their progress. They're starting to buy in, and they can start saying things like, you know what? This doesn't work for me. I think that I could meet this in another way. And I would be like, okay, let's talk, because they are also in a community of learners. It is their learning environment, and they need to be a huge, huge, important part of that. So those are, again, I'm going to go back so we can review all of them. Those are the 7 actual tenets or characteristics of culturally responsive teaching. And when you look at them, you're like, how can people think of these 2 frameworks as being in conflict with each other? Because we're literally asking for the same thing. Asset-based view of all students and their families, realizing that everybody's doing the best they can with what they have, realizing that we have to have high expectations and that some people face barriers that prevent them from learning, and we have to figure out what those barriers are and help learners to eliminate them by saying, okay, you don't have to do it this way, but you can do it that way. And we do that by really focusing on what is relevant, authentic, and meaningful to students. We allow them to make choices just because, again, their regulation is different, temperament's different, their background knowledge is different. And we've talked a lot about even when students have the same label, if you had 20 students that had autism, they're not alike at all. So this concept of let's separate students because they're different doesn't make any sense, because even learners who, may fall into the same label or may have the same amount of background knowledge are going to be different in a million different ways. And then today, what we talked about to go further into that is we culturally mediate instruction by asking students what it is that they can do. What can you do? What is it going to take to get you to know this? What's the most comfortable way for you to express what you know? Eventually you have to get here, but I'm going to value that you're here, and we're going to figure out all the barriers we need to eliminate along the way. And to do that, we have to reshape our curriculum, which means that we have to be really focused on flexible means, but very firm goals. So if we want to get everybody to a certain destination in the classroom, we cannot follow this one-size-fits-all curriculum that was made for this mythical average learner and bores most kids and make them hate school. They just are like, what's the point? I don't see the value for me. We kind of decide very early, this is what we think a good student is. And then anyone who arrives that is not ready to learn gets kind of pushed out of the system, and the system is built for all. And so to do that, we actually have to facilitate learning instead of driving and directing learning, which is a very, very scary shift. So what I want to do is I want to stop. I know that some of you might be with other people. I'll give you about 30 seconds here to, write chats or comments on what are the similarities between universally designed learning and then this concept of culturally responsive teaching, or culturally sustaining pedagogy, as it's sometimes called. And then we're going to make a shift over to talking about the importance of students giving feedback about their own learning environment. So I'm just going to, again, stop real quick here so I can see the chat and to see if anyone has any comments. Somebody wrote that concept of value and honor. So we need to let go of power and we have to move towards value. This does raise questions regarding how well we are preparing our educators to be open to different perspectives. And again, culture is so much bigger. A lot of people, they'll think that, oh, I don't need to learn about culturally responsive teaching because, my students maybe are not diverse. But culture is what makes students who they are. It's their interests. It's their background. It's their families. It's every single thing that makes us who we are and what allows us to show up at a point as us. And that's a part of the journey. Everything that students bring with them is a part of the journey that gets them to where they are. And we have to honor that. That is the student that we are given to teach. It is our calling to teach the students we have. And I always say our job is not just to arrive students who are ready to learn. And one of the things that's so hard for me in my practice is just, when kids don't fit into this mold of being a really good student, what ends up happening is we say they don't belong here. And that, it's like an ableist, dominant, implicit bias. So, again, this concept, so Cornelius Minor, who is a great colleague, he does a lot of work on ELA. He works for Cornelius, no, he doesn't. He works for Columbia University. He always says that, Pokemon is culture right now. Fortnite is culture right now. And again, it's also race and it's also ethnicity, but do we value the people who are in front of us? Do we allow them to bring their voices to the table? Do we give them a path to find themselves and to get their own way to the goal? And do we believe that they can? That's the biggest question. Do we believe they can find their own way? Because they absolutely will when we have those high expectations and we have that asset-based view of what they're capable of. So does anyone have any comments or questions that you'd like to unmute yourself and throw out any ideas here before we kind of switch gears? We're going to be moving over to this concept of, if student voice is so important, how do we get at it? So we're transitioning from this concept of universally designed, culturally sustaining pedagogy to student feedback and student voice within the UDL framework. Any thoughts at all? Okay, just going to give you about 30 more seconds. See if you have any comments. Okay, going to go back to sharing the screen. Okay. So this is an analogy that I use all the time because we always talk about, oh, I love feedback. I ask students for feedback all the time. And the reality is that we don't really love all feedback, right? Because there's 3 types of feedback. There's praise, there's mastery-oriented feedback or coaching, and then there is evaluation, right? And, praise is everything you're good at. So, it's like somebody comes into your room, they observe you teaching, and you're like, I definitely want your feedback. But what you really want is for them to be like, you're the best teacher I've ever seen, right? And because that's positive feedback. And then we have mastery-oriented feedback. And mastery-oriented feedback is more like, this is the reality of what your situation is right now, and this is how you could be better. So it's sometimes called coaching, which means there's no ceiling. No matter what you're doing, it's like, have you considered this by asking questions? Or maybe you could try this, or it would be cool if you did this. And it's this acknowledgement that success has no ceiling. We could always reach further. The next part is evaluation, which is just like a flat out assessment of where you're at. Like you're a D-, you're a 78 out of 100, like you're proficient, right? And we just kind of throw out these labels. Now, I like to use an analogy of like a hotel or a resort because I think it does a really nice job of showing the purpose of the 3 different types of feedback and how they're all necessary. But what we need to do is to create a culture and a community of learners with our students so that all students are able to provide us with mastery-oriented feedback about the learning environment that we are creating for them. So when you're thinking about this lodge at Buckberry Creek, right, it's like the highest rated lodge on TripAdvisor. When you look at the bottom left of this slide, you'll see that's an evaluation of the hotel, right? So, 800 and something people said it's excellent. That's their evaluation, okay? And so we give a ton of evaluation in education. We give GPAs, we give grades on report cards, we give standardized test scores. They take, IQ tests. There's all of these evaluations that give us a number as if that number could ever quantify like how amazing each child is. But that's what we do, right? And we sometimes also give praise, right? And so praise is things like on the bottom left. So I'm just going to paraphrase it for you because you have the screen and you can read it. But it's essentially like, oh my gosh, it's gorgeous. It's amazing. I love it so much. Like it was crazy. Now that feels really good if you're the lodge owner, but it's actually totally useless in helping you make your lodge better. So when we tell kids, oh my gosh, that's so great, they're so great, it makes them feel really good. So it's very necessary. But the reality is if we're looking for them to improve, if we have high expectations that they can always do better and reach higher, that's not going to get them there, right? And then we have what is called mastery-oriented feedback, right? Which on the bottom, I'll paraphrase it for you. And it's basically like, we loved the lodge. It was very nice. The staff were amazing. The bed was amazing. But there are 3 things that they really, that need work. The first is that they had a basement room and it smelled musty. The second is that because they were in the basement, they didn't have a view at all. And then the third is that the breakfast buffet wasn't hot, right? And the interesting thing about that is that's actually the most helpful possible thing that you could ever hear as a restaurant or as a hotel manager, because the evaluations, as you can see, will not help you at all in any way, shape, or form. It makes you feel good, but you're like, why did 15 people say it's terrible? You don't know unless somebody actually provides you with some mastery-oriented feedback. And 861 people think it's excellent, but you don't know why unless they provide you with some sort of feedback, right? So this is what we want to try to get at with our students. We don't just want an evaluation where they fill out a survey. We don't just want them, us to ask them, what's your favorite thing about this class? Because that just means we're going to replicate it, and that's not going to be the best thing for all kids. But this mastery-oriented feedback, right? So I want you to think about, if you're with somebody, you can actually ask them. You can just, reflect on your own. But this concept, I just love this image. I use it all the time. This is from Stone and Heen, who are the authors of Thanks for the Feedback. And basically what they say is that people have different swing recovery combinations: students, learners, educators, us. And when we get positive feedback, how long will that sustain you? And then when somebody gives you what you perceive to be negative, which could either be actually negative feedback, an evaluation, or mastery-oriented feedback, which many people will read as being negative, how long does it take you to recover? Now, what you'll notice here is there's nobody who doesn't get a sting, right? Because it says like negative recovery, which means that some people can get over it quick. But I will tell you, I love feedback, because when someone tells me really positive feedback, I'm feeling really good. When someone tells me something I need to work on, I'm like, oh, like there's like a moment of like annoyance at myself for like not knowing better, or like, and then it's over. And then it's like, you know what? My job is to do better. Thank you so much. I'm going to do better, right? But when you love feedback, it doesn't mean you love negative feedback, because I don't think anyone loves negative feedback, but you love the potential that feedback has in improving your practice. And so what I want you to think about is like where you're at. We're not going to share this because this is like a very kind of personal thing to think about, like, gosh. But what we realize is you can actually learn to love feedback. And that's what that book, Thanks for the Feedback, is about. It's all about like embracing like the gift of failure, embracing the potential, and realizing that when someone gives you any kind of feedback, it's like a huge, huge gift and a huge opportunity to get better. And so, I think that thinking about feedback is, most people, when they think about feedback, they're going to fall into not the blue box. They're not going to love feedback. They're either going to be like, whatever, it doesn't matter what kids say, because if they say it negative, it doesn't even matter. And if they say it positive, they're just trying to kiss up. You hate feedback, which is like, when they say something nice, you forget about it really quick. And then when they say something negative, you like obsess. Like, it's like, I can't believe he said I was the worst teacher. He doesn't even know. And then some of us, when we get the positive feedback, we're feeling like really good. And then when we get the negative feedback, it's like, no. And so like we become more hopeful. But what's really interesting is when you don't love feedback, it's often because you're falling into one of these feedback triggers. And a feedback trigger is when you get feedback and then you in some way are defensive. Okay. And there's 6 reasons why you're going to be defensive. And I love these when you think about the lens of the student, because when we think about the giver in a certain way, or when we think that the giver is treating us differently in a certain way, what we tend to do is we go in what the authors call a switch track, right? So we say to students, listen, I want this class to be more about you. I want to have options and choices that work for you. So I'm going to ask you to self-reflect, to think about what you need as a learner. And then I want you to give feedback on whether my class gives that to you, and again, going to be really respectful, but I would love you to fill out, a sentence stem, like it would be cool if, or have you considered, and this will help me come up with better options so we can kind of work together and collaborate. Now, kids are going to say things that are honest a lot of the time, right? So they might say something like, I don't even need you to write it down because I just want you to know that like I hate this class and like all you do is worksheets and I hate it. Now, what you're going to hear is you're going to say, that was not, like, I cannot believe that kid said that to me in front of all the kids. Now, as soon as you get that defense mechanism up, what ends up happening is that you ignore the feedback. You have thrown away the opportunity to improve. So you've wasted it. You've wasted your own potential to improve. Like you've lowered expectations for yourself when you say, I don't like the way it was given. So one of the best examples to do this is like, imagine that it's like the end of the day on Friday, right? And, the kids are wild. It's right before a vacation. An evaluator comes in and walks through your classroom, just kind of walking through the rooms. And then afterwards is like, hey, listen, like, your class was a little loud and wild. Have you considered, okay, let's just say for a moment, the evaluator is spot on. Like the feedback is solid. Like, have you tried this? And it's really good. But what everybody's going to say is, I cannot believe that person came in on Friday before a vacation. This is ridiculous. That is not the time to come into my classroom. Now, the thing is the feedback was good, right? Or we're going to start going down the credibility road, which is like, she never even taught elementary school. Like she has no idea. She was a middle school teacher. She doesn't know what I'm doing. With kids, we'll say, kids don't know what they need. They don't know what they need. Again, we've lowered our expectations. We're thinking deficit-based. It goes against everything we believe about kids. And then we'll start going all conspiracy theory. That's like the trust one. Like, I bet my next door neighbor called her and said I was being too loud. Or like, that kid just wants to get me fired. And it's like, blah, 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 blah down the road. Now, even if it was a terrible time to give you feedback, even if the person doesn't have expertise, their perception is their reality. And our job is to make a learning environment that works for all students. And therefore, when we get feedback from our evaluators, from our colleagues, from student parents, and from students themselves, we have to acknowledge the fact that there is something that we could do differently, another option we could provide, another choice we could give. Maybe we need to build the relationship more. But what that is that feedback is an opportunity for us to reflect and choose and do. Choose, do, review, right? Someone gives you feedback, you review it, and you make different choices. And those different choices allow you to become better at what you do. Now, we all expect kids to do that, right? We expect kids to be open to our feedback, to make better choices, to do it. How are they ever going to do it if they don't have great models of what that looks like? And the best model that you can ever give them. People always say to me, how do I start? I say, ask your kids, ask your students how you start. I can't tell you where you start because I don't know what the most significant barriers are that your students face. Talk to them. Ask them on a level of engagement to boredom where they're at. Ask them how they like to learn best. Ask them, if there's anything that, what's the best way for you to learn? Do you like books? Do you like movies? How do you like working together? So like when you step back and you do that, what you're realizing is again, it's honor. It's culturally mediated. So this concept of feedback becomes really, really critical because we believe in student voice. And that means we actually have to ask for that feedback. We have to ask for it. The name of the book is Thanks for the Feedback. I'm going to find the link for it right now for you because it is one of the best books I've ever read. And we actually had our entire administrative team read it. It has a really funky little title too. It says, the science and art of receiving feedback well, even when it is off base, unfair, poorly delivered, and frankly, you're not in the mood, which is like the best title ever. Because again, like it is an opportunity. And believe me, I have gotten some digs. I have gotten some digs in my day like you wouldn't believe. And there'll be like a sting where I want to be defensive. And then I'll say to myself like, okay, nope. This is good. Someone perceived this way. I need to change it. And I change it. And every time I change it, Yes, Heather made a really good point. We need to make sure we're prepared to receive it. I think one of the best ways to do this is to, well, one really great way to make yourself feel better is to watch Jimmy Kimmel's Mean Tweets, which is like a late night show where Jimmy Kimmel like has celebrities come on and then they have to read out loud mean things about themselves. We actually like did that kind of in playful fun before we as a central office team asked our district for feedback. And so one of the things that we did in my district, which I'm very, very proud of, and it's not for the faint of heart, is we said, how can we expect teachers to ask students for feedback if we're not willing to if we're not willing to, as administrators, ask our teachers for feedback? So we do something twice a year called the Central Office Report Card, where we will send out a report card for all of the Central Office administrators to every single staff member, paraeducators, cafeteria, our teachers, our administrators. It's completely anonymous, and they have to grade us in 3 areas. Visibility, do you see us around doing important work? Our ability to act as a resource, which means like we're helpful, and then like communication, like is it respectful, is it too much, is it too little? And then they have to say that we are exemplary, proficient, needs improvement, or unsatisfactory, which is an evaluation. But if they give us a needs improvement or an unsatisfactory, they also need to give us some mastery-oriented feedback, and we give them the sentence starter, it would be cool if, have you considered? So people will say things like, let's say that you get a weak score in visibility, people would be like, it would be really cool if like, I'm sure you're busy, but it would be really cool if you actually took the time to, to walk through our classrooms or maybe pop in and know our names. It feels like you're all business and you don't know anybody, right? And then what we do is we actually make our evaluations public. So I'll write and say like, thank you so much, everyone. 94% of you, said that I was proficient or exemplary, in my ability to act as a resource, which seems like, woohoo, the world is perfect. That means like 30 people think I'm not. And those 30 people have a reason why they think I'm not. And I need to know what those reasons are. So the next time, maybe only 25 or 20, right? And so like, I really, really value the feedback, and people make really, really good points. I remember once somebody said something like, it would be really cool if you weren't always so distracted. It feels like you're not super friendly. And like, literally people were like laughing. They're like, that is so bizarre. People said you weren't friendly. And I'm like, I know, like, I've never gotten that. There's a lot of things you can say about me, but I'm like, obsessively kind of smiley. And so, so I was like reading it and I was like, this is like really bothering me. Like, I don't know why anyone would say that I'm like distracted and I'm not connecting with, So anyway, I'm like, I just have to think about it. And what I realized was I'll do hundreds of classroom walkthroughs a year to try to get like a pulse on what's happening district wide so I can better inform professional development. And, what I do is when I walk into a teacher's classroom, I like to send them a note. Like, this is what I saw. I loved it. Could I share it with this other person? Have you thought of this? Like, so it's like praise, mastery, or feedback. So when I walk out of a classroom, I just go directly on my phone so I can write to the teacher before I get to the next classroom. Because I don't evaluate teachers, but I just want them to know, like, I noticed, I like what you did there. That's awesome. Like, can I share it with other people? So like, I'm doing it and all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh. So I like put my phone away and I like put it in my pocket and I look up and there are like literally teachers everywhere. I'm like, hey, what's up? How's it going? And like people are in their classroom. So what it looked like was that I wasn't approachable and I wasn't friendly because every time I was walking in the hallway, I was like this. And it was fascinating because I had this like aha moment that like, that's it. Because like in meetings, I don't do that. And in the parking lot, I don't do that. But it was like, okay. So what I learned was the perception was that I wasn't interested in what was going around me because my head was always in my phone. I don't do it anymore, right? So I'll write notes real quick as I'm in the room. And then when I get back to my office, I email everybody. So like that's an example that said, the feedback, even when it seems off base, is you can get to the root of it if you're open to it. So any comments or anything like that just on this concept of, everyone always wants to know where to start. And it really, really, you have to ask your learners, like, what are the biggest barriers that are preventing you from accessing and engaging in this work? And let's have like a really important talk about like, what works for you in this class and what doesn't. And from there, I'm going to try really hard to give you options. So like if people say too much group work, you can give options more often to work alone. Now, you're not going to do it all the time because collaboration is important. If people say, we do too much busy work. Like, what other options can you provide? What other choices do students have? And you have to use them as co-designers in the learning environment, because you have to facilitate experiences that work for them. And I assure you, you can do that with an assigned curriculum, because an assigned curriculum is going to have an essential question. It's going to have resources that you can use, but you need to give them additional resources, additional options, and you need to be talking with them through the unit to make sure they understand that we have to figure out a way to make it relevant, authentic, and meaningful. And so any comments on feedback besides Heather had a really awesome comment again about preparing yourself for it. And again, every time we do it, I'm like, oh, I just want to get it over with. I just want to read it. Okay, so for this last piece here, okay, we're going to dive into the last section, which is where, now you're seeing the thanks for the feedback. Okay, what we're going to do here is we're going to move into this concept of investments, right? So a lot of people are like, man, like UDL is going to take time, it's going to take money, it's going to take resources. We don't have that. And the reality is you have a finite amount of time. Every teacher does, every administrator does, every learner does, right? But I want to talk about financial portfolios for a minute. So there are 3 types of financial portfolios. So let's say that you have retirement funds, or you do like a 403B or an IRA, and you meet with a financial advisor. They're going to say to you, do you want a conservative portfolio, a balanced portfolio, or an aggressive portfolio? Now, conservative is like savings accounts, mutual funds, very, very little risk and very, very little change, but it's solid, it's dependable, right? So some people, when they learn about UDL, they want to go really, really, really slow. And that's okay, right? Because you're saying, all right, like I'm feeling really, really good about having options for materials. So I'm going to do like conservative investment at first, right? And, you're going to see little changes in your students, just by saying, remember, it's goals, methods, materials, and assessment. So I'm going to change up the materials, and you're like, oh, I'm starting to see some gains. I might change up 1 or 2 assessments a month. You're going to see little gains. You know what? On the next assignment, I'm going to say, after my mini lesson, you can choose to learn it in a group or with a book or with a video. And then, okay, right, that's conservative. Aggressive is like, this has rocked my world. I'm not doing anything right. I need to like literally stop doing lessons the way that I'm doing them. Like I need to start over, right? Now, this is like go big or go home, and it could be amazing. And you could also lose your tush, right? Because there are things that you do now that are working. That is why you are still employed. That is why you have relationships with students, right? So you don't want to throw everything. Although, technically you could you could hit the lottery on it, right? So I personally had a more balanced portfolio when I first learned about UDL. Like I was like, you know what? I can't see how I could ever give choices in teaching methodology. It just doesn't make sense. I don't get it. But I get the assessment piece. So I went like big. I'm like, you know what? On the next unit that comes up, I'm just throwing away the essay. And I'm going to say, listen, you got to write, you got to do this, you got to do this. How are we going to do it? Let's come up with every way we could do it. Like, boom, like let's go aggressive here. And I had kids making like graffiti projects on sheets, and they had to do writing to go along with it. And it was wild, right? But it was balanced because I'm like, I still need to focus on like these practices because they are effective for my students. And I know some of them still face barriers. And so I'm going to make conservative changes there. But like, I just want you to recognize that this is not something where there's a right and a wrong way to start, that you have to do what's going to be the best investment for you and your students. So making money is a lot like student achievement, right? If you invest well, you see the number on your bank account go up, right? But you don't do it because you want the bank, like the numbers are actually meaningless. Okay. It's like what the numbers represent that's really important. So when you're thinking about like, oh wow, now I have X amount of dollars, you're not excited because you care about that stack of money. You're excited because what it means is like you get more for it. Like it's representative of something, right? But where I decide to put my money, it's called strategic asset allocation, right? And when we're trying to improve the student numbers, and again, We don't care about the student number. I don't care that a student gets like a 700 on like a state test, right? I don't care about that number, but I do care about what that number represents, right? Because with money, when I have the higher number, I go on better vacations. I can take more financial risks, right? Because it's like, you know, you start getting more aggressive as you start getting more achievement. You know, you have more security, your stress levels decrease. Now, when we focus on kids being purposeful and knowledgeable and resourceful and strategic, when we do all those things, okay, what happens is, as a result of that, is they will take more ownership of their learning. Okay. And they will become more creative and they will get better at solving problems because we've created a community of learners where we're like, the whole cycle is about problems. Choose, do, review. How do I fix that mistake? How do I do it better, right? They can self-regulate. They learn how to cope, how they learn best. They become much more self-reliant because they know I'm not just going to come over and do it all the time because I believe that they can. They're resilient. Their stress and anxiety decrease. And so what I know is when that number goes up, learning has occurred. So I am not going to teach to the test. I'm going to teach for learning. And when kids are learners, when they're expert learners, that number goes up. I'm going to invest, you know, I'm going to strategically allocate my assets so that that number is going to go up, but I'm not doing it because of that. I'm doing it because I want to buy a house. I'm doing it because I want to put a pool in my backyard. I'm doing it because I want my parents to be able to retire early, right? So this concept of like the numbers is, I just want to like end with this thought because so many people are like UDL and standardized testing are somehow in conflict with each other. And that is not the case, that the numbers will go up when kids become learners because it is a standards-based curriculum design. And in addition to meeting the standards, because all of our lessons are designed, this is what you're going to know, this is what you're going to be able to do. We're going to figure out the things that prevent you from doing that, and we're going to eliminate them. Okay, we're gonna work because I have high expectations for you. I have high expectations for your family and how they're going to support you. I believe that you will find your own value in this, and I will facilitate because I will not fail. Okay, you will not fail because I will not let you fail because I believe in you and I don't fail, right? And that's like bringing full circle. That's the efficacy, that's the expectations, that's the UDL, that's the self-regulated learning, and that's culturally responsiveness. And so what we're really trying to do here is we're trying to start a movement where we're deconstructing the systems that believed that there was one way to learn and one way to share what you know. And that was good for the students who arrived compliant and close to grade level with their background knowledge, who also had the ability to self-regulate. That is not reality. And now that we believe in equity and inclusion, we start moving all kids together in environments and we acknowledge that they need different things. And the only framework that exists that is evidence-based, that focuses on this concept of personalization, is universal design for learning. And it can be married within a multi-tiered system of support. It aligns to culturally sustained pedagogy. It's focused on student behavior and social emotional functioning and academics. You know, it's all about this concept of improvement science. There is not a single initiative in education today, you know, responsive classroom, restorative circles, trauma-informed practice, that isn't about we have to value our learners. And to do that, we have to deconstruct the system that told us there was one way for us to teach and there was one way for students to learn. And so this is just so important to like me as an administrator and as like a teacher, always in my heart, and as a mother, to know that there is a framework that really truly embraces every student as they come to us and their families behind them and all the experiences that brought us together, right? Because that's what the reality is we were brought together and we have to take advantage of the 180 days that we're brought together and give them the best damn experience that we can give to that child. And that is not going to be being a robot and following a script and expecting every single kid to perform in the same way as if they come with the same background knowledge and have the same potential and have the same interests and ability. So I'm going to stop that now, and we have 5 minutes for questions here. And to see, you know, if there's any final questions, I probably have time for 1 or 2. Does anyone have anything they would like to say or ask? I see a thank you. I don't know how much I can answer that, but how do you differentiate personalized learning from UDL is a very good question. So personalized learning is that students are working on different things, right? And so I can actually pull this up really quickly. Is there's like a visual for personalized learning, but it's personalized learning is more of an outcome. And what we need to do is we need to create, there needs to be a framework to get us to that outcome. So I'm going to pull up a personalized learning visual here so you can see what it looks like. And then, where, goodness gracious. Sorry, I'm like looking for, there's like a very popular visual for personalized learning. Ah, here it is, I found it. And it talks about personalization is all about like growth mindset, 21st century learning, this concept of allowing students to have options for how they're going to communicate, collaborate, think critically, and be creative, right? So I almost think of that as almost being like an outcome. Like personalized learning is an outcome. Kids are doing different things, but how do we get there? Because like capital P, capital L, personalized learning doesn't have guidance to how you get there. You know, it's just that, you know, students are working towards different areas, but how do you get them to work towards different areas? You need a framework that tells you you need to provide options for goals, methods, materials, and assessments. Sometimes also personalized learning gets away from standards. So like I'm certainly a fan of things like Genius Hour, but Genius Hour, like kids could literally be working on passion projects that are completely separate from the standards that they do have to know and be able to do. So like how do you kind of marry those two together? Someone says, where are you seeing UDL district wide? So BCSC is a district in Columbus, Indiana. I know that they welcome visitors. They do 2 big conferences a year where they bus people around. It's really awesome. George Van Horn is the director of special education there, and he's a part of the CAST cadre. And so I know that BCSC, it's again Bartholomew Consolidated School Corporation in Columbus, Indiana, they do it district-wide. They're a very large district. I want to say like 20,000 students. And what they do is they have it actually, it's 50% of their teacher evaluation is explicitly universal design for learning. So it's actually required as a component of educator evaluation. We do the same thing. The contact for visitation at BCSC would be George Van Horn. I will write his email address in here right now. He's a good friend of mine. You could be like, Novak did it. She told me to contact you. And then he'll be like, nah, that sounds like Novak. Okay. In my district, we're also doing the same thing is we are, we've always been really, really open to walkthroughs, but now we're getting so many of them that we're going to take 1 day a quarter where basically we say we're accepting visitors during this day. We'll start off with PD in the morning. We'll take people around to all the classrooms. We'll pay a small stipend to have the teachers stay after to ask them questions. So we're going to start working into that because right now it's kind of like, you know, weekly people are asking to walk in, but we don't want to take the focus away from like, you know, I want to be in classrooms and be talking to teachers and things like that. Where would you begin implementing UDL mindsets and frameworks throughout all levels in an organization? Because I really think that it starts with MTSS. And like the MTSS self-assessment is like what is missing as a critical driver that's like preventing what's happening on the inside. So when you're thinking about MTSS, I don't have a 1 day visitation scheduled. So if you want to come out, I'll schedule it. So it's basically when we have people start asking, we'll be like, we'll do it then. But if you all want to come out, we could make like a really big, awesome day of it. You know, where again, we do PD in the morning. We all have breakfast together. You know, we can bus everybody around. We actually own 2 district buses. And I mean, I have some absolute like knock your socks off rock stars in UDL. So you are always just let me know when you're coming, and we can schedule that for sure. But I think that it's really about the outside piece because like right now we're so focused on living in that inside piece, but there's barriers that prevent that inside piece from being like very, very beautifully, amazingly, universally designed. Like, for example, if not all students are proportionally scheduled in your classroom, you may have a classroom of mythical average learners who are compliant. And then you're going to get teachers who say, I don't need to do this. My kids do fine. The reality is as soon as that classroom actually becomes inclusive and, proportionally scheduled, everybody now needs to collaborate on what UDL is. So, the systematic barriers of tracking, of labeling, of a lot of separate programming, that needs to be deconstructed, because otherwise you have people in pockets fighting for this. And the very real reality is that some people are like, I don't really need to do this. Their students might be bored, but they're proficient. And because we look at that number as meaning something, we say, I don't need to change what I'm doing. And so, in our district, we proportionally schedule. That's a part of our district improvement plan. And next year, so for we have about 15% of kids with special education, which means that every class will have 15% of students with special education. No class will have more, no class will have less, including AP courses and honors courses at the high school. And so the idea is if you can't figure out a way to make that class inclusive, it will not run. And so that's 5 years in the making, but every single class will look like the population of our school. And me and the special ed director have worked so hard together to make that a reality, to make sure that the IEP language doesn't preclude that. And so next year is the first official year where that's going to happen in our district. And because of that, once we made the decision to move in that direction, people were like, I need to know what UDL is. And we're like, yeah, baby. But we've made amazing growth in so many different areas. But the most important area, even if I could erase the student achievement growth, which has been significant, is our kids are included together in the classroom, and they're all being supported and they're all being challenged. And that will never be trumped by test scores for me, is like seeing kids value and work and collaborate together and come up with their own ideas and have those ideas be valued. It's a really beautiful thing when you can see it 5 years in. So we are now at 7:30 my time or 4:30 your time. I encourage any of you to continue to keep in touch with me. I'm happy to share resources. If I said anything tonight in passing that seemed quick and you want to know more about it, you can always email me. I'll put my email right on the bottom of this chat. And I wish you all the best in your UDL journey. I hope that I am a part of it again in some way, shape, or form. I spend a lot of time in Cali, so hopefully we'll bump into each other. But thank you so much for this series, and then I really look forward to hopefully working with some of you in the future.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you so much for all your great work and all the advice and the wonderful words of inspiration and motivation that you've given us throughout this 4 series of webinars. We've enjoyed it very much. We've archived it. And so I hope a lot more people will share it and disseminate the useful messages here. But thank you everyone for attending. Please do feel free to share the webinars as widely as you can. That's the whole purpose behind our work. We do want this message to be spread. And I'll keep it going for a little bit more as Katie interacts with people on chat. But thanks everyone for participating.
All right, everybody, keep in touch. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, everyone. All right, take care. Bye.